Have you ever felt the weight of knowing too much and being understood too little? Like your mind sees patterns others miss, connects threads others overlook, but instead of feeling empowered, you feel isolated, misread, maybe even exhausted by the constant hum of thinking that never seems to turn off. Highly intelligent people often carry a quiet burden, not because they lack strength, but because they see with too much clarity. Where others accept, they question. Where others move on, they reflect. And with that reflection comes not just insight, but loneliness, restlessness, and at times frustration with a world that rewards noise more than depth. But intelligence, in the Stoic sense, isn't about how much you know. It's about how clearly you see, how calmly you choose, and how deeply you remain anchored in what you can control. It's less about outsmarting others, and more about not being overpowered by your own mind. So, if you've ever felt out of place, not because you don't belong, but because you see things differently, this might be for you. Let's explore together, not just what intelligence looks like from the outside, but what it feels like to live with it on the inside. Stay with me. You may find that what once felt like a struggle was actually a signal. 1. Small talk feels like starvation. Have you ever stood in a room full of people, nodding along, smiling politely, while a voice inside you quietly asked, "Why are we talking about this?" Maybe it was a chat about the weather, someone's third pet, or the latest backyard renovation down the street. Everyone seemed engaged, even cheerful. But you felt like you were fading, not out of arrogance, but because the conversation felt hollow. For the Stoic warrior, this isn't snobbery, it's alignment. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." A mind that's trained to seek meaning, to question its own assumptions, to wrestle with the eternal, cannot survive long on a diet of gossip and trivia. It's not that the small moments of life are beneath you, they simply aren't enough for you. Not anymore. A highly intelligent soul naturally gravitates toward the marrow of existence. They want to understand not what happened, but why it matters. They want to know how power works, why suffering shapes us, what it means to act with virtue in a collapsing world. And so, small talk doesn't just bore them, it drains them, like being asked to breathe through a straw when they know the whole sky is available. Imagine a man named Cassius. He attends a dinner party, smiling out of courtesy, sipping wine as others trade stories of sales, scandals, and silly neighbors. But Cassius is somewhere else. His mind is quietly turning over an idea he encountered earlier that day. Am I living in accordance with nature, or simply reacting to the noise around me? He tries to bring up the question lightly at first, but his words are met with blank stares, or worse, a joke. That night, he walks home early, not out of disdain, but because he knows the truth of who he is. He's not meant for surfaces, he's meant for depth. This is the silent struggle of the intelligent. Not fitting in doesn't mean you're broken. It might mean you've simply outgrown the need for constant noise. You're not impatient, you're precise. You're not cold, you're discerning. And though you may feel out of place among the shallow waters of chatter, you are built for the ocean floor. So what's the lesson? You don't need to shame small talk, but you don't need to shrink yourself to fit it either. Practice patience, yes, but also protect your inner fire. As Seneca reminds us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Your time is sacred. Let your mind feast on substance, not scraps. And if you ever feel lonely in a room full of voices, remember this: silence doesn't mean emptiness. For the Stoic warrior, silence is often the first sign that you're finally listening to something real. Let's go deeper. because what happens when the conversations you crave simply never come? 2. You speak with precision, not noise. Have you ever stood on the edge of a conversation, not because you had nothing to say, but because you were still weighing the weight of saying it? While others speak like arrows shot on impulse, you hold your tongue, not out of fear, but out of respect. For words, for truth, for consequence. And so the world may see you as distant, even cold. But deep down, you know, you're not silent because you're empty. You're silent because you're full. Epictetus once said, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." That's not just advice. It's a way of life for those who carry deep intelligence and inner discipline. You don't speak to impress. You speak to clarify, to reveal, not decorate, to offer something rooted, not just heard. It's not always easy. In a world obsessed with speed and noise, your deliberate speech can be mistaken for delay, your thoughtfulness mistaken for hesitation. I once knew a man named Elias who rarely spoke during meetings. While others bantered ideas like tennis balls, he sat still, shoulders relaxed, eyes tracking every word. Then, near the end, he would speak. One sentence, maybe two, and silence would fall. Because, when Elias spoke, the room listened, not out of habit, but because his words carried the weight of stillness, not noise. But here's the irony. His silence made people uncomfortable. Some thought he was aloof, too serious, maybe even judgmental. But the truth, Elias was simply practicing self-restraint. He didn't speak until his words were clear in his own mind, until they served something beyond ego, and that made him rare. In the Stoic path, restraint is not weakness. It is power at rest. To hold back when you could speak, to choose clarity over cleverness, is a form of mastery. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. The Stoic warrior doesn't waste breath chasing validation. He speaks when speech becomes necessary, not convenient. But there's a cost, isn't there? When you speak rarely, people start to project. They say you're distant, too intense, hard to read. But that's because most people aren't used to someone who weighs words like a sculptor weighs stone. They expect conversation to be quick, effortless, and filled with decoration. You, on the other hand, treat language like a blade. If it's going to be unsheathed, it better be sharp, clean, and used with purpose. There's a young woman I once met, Clara, brilliant, perceptive, and always quiet in the crowd. But if you sat with her one-on-one, you'd hear her dissect a single sentence from Seneca like it was a map to her soul. One day, someone mocked her at a gathering, calling her the mute genius. She didn't flinch. She just smiled and replied softly, "I'd rather be remembered for one honest sentence than a lifetime of noise." That night, nobody forgot her. If you've ever been misunderstood for your silence, take heart. You're not here to fill air, you're here to speak truth. And truth, like a sword, doesn't need to be loud, it needs to be sharp. Precision over popularity, purpose over performance. So, yes, being careful with your words may leave you out of certain conversations, but it also means you never betray your mind to please the moment. That's not hesitation. That's honor. That's discipline. And if that makes you seem serious, then so be it. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more warriors of thought. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Now let's talk about what happens when your silence is mistaken, not just for seriousness, but for arrogance. 3. You move differently in social spaces. Have you ever replayed a conversation in your mind 100 times, analyzing every word, every pause, every glance, only to realize the moment has long passed and no one else is still thinking about it but you. Maybe it was a joke that didn't land, a silence that stretched too long, a glance that left you uncertain, and suddenly your mind whispers, "You don't belong here." This is the quiet sting many intelligent people carry, not because they lack the desire to connect, but because their thoughts often move in deeper, more winding paths. By the time they've finished forming a careful response, the conversation has already moved on. It's not a failure of presence, it's the side effect of precision. The Stoics knew that what seems awkward in society is often the sign of someone who has not sacrificed their nature for applause. Epictetus said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." And in many ways, this awkwardness is a hidden strength. It shows you are not performing, you are observing, you are resisting the need to mold yourself to the moment just to be liked. I remember a young man named Tiberius who once stood in front of a small group at a family gathering. He was asked about his studies, something he knew deeply, loved fully. But as he spoke, he chose words with too much care, paused too often, and gave examples that flew over the heads of his audience. The room grew restless. A cousin smirked. An uncle interrupted with a joke. Tiberius sat down, silent. Embarrassed? Perhaps, but not defeated. That night he wrote a letter to himself, a reminder that understanding doesn't always lead to applause, and that fitting in should never cost one's inner truth. Social ease, in Stoic terms, is not the highest virtue. Integrity is. And sometimes, integrity comes wrapped in long pauses, mismatched timing, and conversations that don't go as planned. But this doesn't make you broken, it makes you rare. Yes, the world prefers charm over contemplation, but charm fades, depth builds. If you stumble through small talk, but light up when speaking of the nature of time, the ethics of silence, or the architecture of the soul, then you are not awkward. You are simply tuned to a different frequency, one the crowd hasn't learned to hear. And yes, there is pain in this. There's a longing to connect, to belong, to not always feel like the foreigner in your own language. But, as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are clear, patient, and rooted in virtue, then your solitude is not a curse, it's training. So next time your words feel misplaced or your timing feels off, remember, you are not performing for the crowd, you are shaping your speech with honor. You are choosing clarity over charm. And that's a rare kind of courage, one that doesn't chase applause, but walks forward with quiet strength. Because the Stoic warrior does not need to be the most likable in the room, he only needs to be the most authentic. And as you'll soon see, sometimes that very authenticity, the refusal to play social games, becomes a source of misunderstanding far deeper than awkwardness. 4. Real friendship feels rare. Have you ever sat in a room full of people, laughed at the right times, smiled when expected, and still walked away feeling like no one really saw you? Not the depth, not the questions, not the stillness behind your eyes, just the surface, just the role you played. For many intelligent souls, friendship is not about proximity, it's about recognition. Not in the sense of being admired, but being understood. And that, more often than not, feels like a luxury in a world that seems more interested in validation than truth. The Stoics understood this well. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve." But here lies the paradox. When your thoughts are sharp, your values deep, and your standards clear, you will often find yourself alone, not because you reject others, but because few resonate at the same pitch. Some people mistake your silence for arrogance. Others feel small in your presence, not because you make them feel that way, but because they carry their own insecurities. And so they pull away, they avoid connection, they tell themselves, that person is too much for me, not realizing you were never trying to be above them. You were just trying to be real. I once met a woman named Helena, brilliant, grounded and loyal beyond words. Yet in her 30s, she confided that she'd never had what she would call a true friend. Not because she hadn't tried, but because every time she shared something that mattered, something philosophical, something raw, people would either joke it away, change the subject, or go quiet. Eventually, she started holding it all in, watering herself down, smiling more, saying less. Until one day she asked herself, what's the point of friendship if I have to hide who I am to keep it? That question led her to something the Stoics would have applauded, the courage to be alone until she found those worthy of her presence. She stopped chasing compatibility and started choosing alignment. And over time, those rare few who saw her, truly saw her, emerged one by one, warriors in their own quiet ways. This is the truth. Friendships built on pretending are worse than solitude. The Stoic path teaches us that virtue, not volume, defines value. You don't need many, you just need a few whose presence sharpens your mind and strengthens your character. So, if you've ever asked yourself, should I dim my light to be more accepted? Let me offer you a better question. What kind of friend would I attract if I stood fully in my truth? The answer may not come quickly, but when it does, it will be real, and real is always worth the wait. So, stay the course. Protect your standards. Choose substance over convenience. And remember, those who are meant for you won't need you to explain your silence. They'll feel it and understand. If this resonates, drop a quiet "seen" in the comments. And if you're finding strength in these reminders, consider subscribing. Not to join a crowd, but to walk a little further with those who think, feel, and see like you. Because next, we'll look at what happens when your mind is so active, even rest feels like work. 5. Retreat becomes a quiet cage. Have you ever looked at your calendar and realized the only place you've been in weeks is your desk? Not because anyone forced you, not because you don't want connection, but because somewhere along the line, retreat became routine. Not the noble kind the Stoics praised, but the quiet kind that slowly cages you inside your own mind. For those with deeply analytical minds, the outside world often feels out of sync. Where others find ease in casual banter or weekend escapes, you find noise. Noise that you can't process quickly. Noise that doesn't answer the questions your soul keeps asking. So, instead of chasing connection that rarely satisfies, you go inward and you work. You build, you think, you perfect. You seek solace in the one arena where your clarity feels rewarded, achievement. But as Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors, unless with a view to some mutual benefit. The message isn't to isolate, it's to engage with intention. Stillness is strength, but stillness that forgets the breath of the world becomes stagnation. I knew a man, let's call him Silas, brilliant, thoughtful, a master of his craft. By 35, he had published books, led teams, and built a reputation that most only dream of. But he often ate alone, not because no one wanted him around, but because every time he tried to open up in groups, the rhythm felt off. He couldn't fake laughter, couldn't force interest in topics that didn't spark fire in his chest, so he defaulted to his fortress, his work. The problem? That fortress became a prison. He started mistaking activity for vitality, productivity for meaning. And though his mind was full of projects, his soul quietly thinned. One day, during a short walk through the city, he saw two old men playing chess in the park, not speaking much, just present, together. That image haunted him for weeks, not because he envied their leisure, but because he realized they had balance. They weren't escaping life, they were in it, fully. This is where many intelligent warriors falter, not in thinking too little, but in living too little. It starts with one excuse. I'll go next time. Then another. I need to finish this first. Before long, years pass. You've mastered complexity, but forgotten the simplicity of being around others who don't require explanation. The Stoic path is not a vow of solitude, it is a commitment to intentional solitude. Seneca wrote, "We must indulge the mind, and from time to time allow it the leisure which is its food and strength. That includes stepping outside, not for distraction but for restoration, for perspective, for renewal." When the balance tilts too far inward, you become sharp but brittle, productive but lonely, focused but disconnected from the very life you're trying to understand. And slowly, that disconnect can erode your sense of joy, your spontaneity, your lightness, until even rest feels like labor. You don't have to become a social butterfly, that's not your nature. But neither should you let your mind convince you that walls are safer than windows. Go to the cafe. Sit at the park. Share a moment with someone who doesn't need to debate metaphysics to make you smile. These are not distractions, they are breath. And the mind, no matter how strong, needs to breathe. So, if you don't get out much, ask yourself this: is my stillness a choice or a shield? Because there is a difference between silence that heals and silence that hides. One restores you, the other erases you, slowly. And when you begin to notice this, something shifts. You stop seeing life as something to observe from a distance. You step into it, cautiously but fully, because the world doesn't need more isolated minds. It needs wise hearts that remember how to feel the wind, not just analyze its speed, which brings us to something even deeper, the reason why no matter how much you accomplish, the restlessness never quite leaves. 6. You drown in too many angles. Have you ever stood at the crossroads of a decision, big or small, and found yourself frozen, not by fear, but by thought? Your mind races ahead, mapping every possibility, running every scenario, weighing every consequence. What if this leads to that? What if that opens a door you didn't mean to walk through? What if the most right answer still isn't enough? This is what many highly perceptive minds carry, the burden of clarity that becomes too sharp. You don't simply act, you dissect. You don't just choose, you calculate. And while this might look like wisdom on the outside, on the inside, it often feels like quicksand. The Stoics warned us of this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A man must stand erect, not be kept erect by others." But what if the thing keeping you from standing tall isn't other people? It's your own mind folding in on itself. To think deeply is a gift. But to be ruled by thought is not strength, it's entanglement. There's a difference between clarity and fixation, between being careful and being consumed. The Stoic warrior knows, overanalyzing is not a sign of higher awareness. It is often a sign that action has been replaced by perfectionism disguised as prudence. I once knew a man named Thales. He was brilliant. While others acted quickly and recklessly, he paused. And paused, and paused. Every decision, from changing careers to choosing a brand of toothpaste, became a private symposium of pros, cons, risks, and what-ifs. He told himself he was being deliberate, but over time, his inaction became a pattern. He missed opportunities, not because he lacked courage, but because his mind never gave him permission to move. One day, he confessed to me, "I don't fear failure. I fear making the wrong move when I could have found a better one." But the Stoic lens would flip that thinking. Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do." Meaning, it's not about finding the perfect outcome, it's about showing up in the moment, choosing with virtue, and accepting the result with honor. Overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility, but more often it's resistance. A resistance to imperfection. A resistance to letting go of control. And so, the mind circles endlessly, hoping to delay discomfort with one more layer of logic. But the truth? Action brings clarity, not the other way around. You don't learn to swim by reading about water. You learn by stepping in, even if the current is strong. The Stoic warrior doesn't need guarantees. He moves with reason, yes, but he moves. He doesn't chase certainty. He builds strength by facing uncertainty with calm purpose. There's a story of a woman named Mira. She was asked to lead a team on a difficult project. Her mind told her she wasn't ready. She mapped out every risk, wrote pages of notes, analyzed outcomes. By the time she agreed, the opportunity had already passed. Someone else stepped in, less prepared, less precise, but willing. And they succeeded, not because they knew more, but because they dared to begin. Mira later reflected, "I was so busy preparing to be perfect, I forgot how to be present." That lesson stayed with her. She learned that sometimes wisdom isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing when to move, even if you don't. So if your thoughts ever feel like a maze with no exit, remember, your value isn't measured by how much you analyze. It's revealed in how you act, in how you choose, even amid uncertainty, in how you stand, not perfectly, but fully. Because the warrior's strength is not in knowing every possible outcome, it's in choosing the next step with honor and letting the rest unfold as it must. And sometimes, the very clarity you're searching for doesn't arrive before the leap. It waits for you after. Which leads us to another quiet struggle, the loneliness of always being the one who sees too much, too soon. 7. Your mind hungers for challenge. Do you ever find yourself doing something ordinary, folding laundry, walking down a familiar street, sitting through a routine conversation, and suddenly feeling a quiet sense of frustration? Not because anything is wrong, but because nothing is new. Nothing is stretching you. Nothing is challenging the mind behind your calm eyes. This is the hunger few talk about. The hunger of a mind that cannot stand still, for those built to see deeply, to question, to break apart ideas and rebuild them stronger. Ordinary tasks quickly become too familiar. They don't feed you, they repeat. And repetition, while comforting to some, feels like confinement to a warrior of thought. Seneca wrote, "The mind must be given relaxation. It will rise improved and sharper after a good break." But what if even the break needs to be meaningful? What if your mind, even in rest, still wants to explore? That isn't impatience, that's design. You were built not to coast, but to carve, not to float through comfort, but to challenge the river. I remember a man named Lucan, a mathematician turned teacher. To his colleagues he was brilliant, capable of solving complex problems in minutes. But Lucan often looked restless, not anxious, restless. Every task completed felt like a box checked too quickly. Every system mastered became to him an old song on repeat. He once told a student, The real burden of the mind is not that it can't solve the problem, it's that it solved it too soon, and now it's waiting for what's next. And so he read philosophy at night, studied architecture on weekends, taught himself ancient languages in the spaces between obligations. But the deeper truth he eventually found wasn't just in more information. It was in returning to the basics with fresh eyes, in choosing how he engaged with the world, not just what he studied. You see, the Stoic warrior doesn't chase stimulation endlessly. He directs his curiosity with discipline. Marcus Aurelius observed, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." This is the pivot. When the world no longer feels challenging, don't blame the world. Sharpen your gaze. Sometimes, the greatest exercise for a hungry mind isn't in mastering something new, it's in mastering presence. Paying closer attention, seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, understanding that even the act of folding clothes, when done with full awareness, can become a meditation on order, on usefulness, on rhythm and care. But yes, there is a weight to carrying this kind of mind. It wants more than what life easily offers. It wants meaning, direction, discovery. So you search, and often feel like the next mountain is just out of reach. This is where the Stoic path becomes essential, not to silence that hunger, but to train it, to turn the craving into curiosity, and the curiosity into craft. You do not need to escape the world to feel alive. You need only to meet it with full attention, as if every moment carries the potential for awakening, because it does. So if your mind feels starved by repetition, if simple tasks leave you sighing in silence, don't numb that edge. Sharpen it. Find a new way to observe, a deeper way to listen, a slower way to act. And remind yourself, growth doesn't always come from what you learn. Sometimes it comes from how deeply you see what's already in front of you. Let's explore what happens when that same intense perception starts to affect not just your thinking, but your sense of connection with others. 8. Success feels like a cage. Have you ever looked at your own accomplishments, not with pride, but with the quiet fear that they are now the minimum you must meet forever? That what once felt like a win now feels like a weight? It's as if the bar keeps rising, not because others demand it, but because something within you refuses to let it lower. You've built an image of capability, of brilliance, of always knowing, always delivering, and now that image has become a cage. The Stoics remind us that the only true measure of success is living in accordance with reason and virtue, not with reputation or the expectations of others. But let's be honest, when you've been praised your whole life for how sharp you are, how quickly you solve problems, how flawlessly you perform, it's hard to untangle your worth from your output. You begin to believe that being seen as intelligent is your role in the world, and any moment you fall short, you've failed your role. There was once a woman named Leona, gifted, yes, but more than that, deeply disciplined. She never missed a deadline, always led the room, always had the answer. People relied on her confidence, but no one ever asked what it cost. Every casual compliment, "Of course you nailed it again," came with a hidden edge. The pressure to maintain, to outperform herself, to never appear lost or unsure. She began waking earlier, staying later, pushing harder, not out of passion, but out of fear. Fear that if she slowed down, the illusion would crack. And then what? Who would she be if she wasn't always succeeding? This is the silent tension for many intelligent people. The world expects brilliance. You expect precision. And in between those expectations, you begin to lose the right to be human. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others unless with a view to some mutual benefit. That includes their judgments, their comparisons, even their praise, because if you live only to meet the approval of others, you are no longer free, you are performing. And yet, even as you strive to meet these invisible standards, there is another layer. People may begin to reduce you to your intellect alone. You become the smart one, not the kind one, not the curious one, not the tired one, just the brain, just the achiever. And when people don't see past that image, it creates a gap between how you're perceived and who you truly are. That gap can feel lonely. You long to be known, not just respected. You want someone to understand the nights when your mind won't quiet down, when even success tastes hollow, when perfection feels more like pressure than pride. But few ask. They assume you're fine. You're the one who always gets it right, right? And then there's the internal whisper. If I stop now, they'll see I never really deserved it. That's not humility. That's bondage. The warrior of reason does not define himself by victory. He defines himself by effort, by alignment, by intention. Seneca wrote, "Success is not about always getting what you want, but always acting rightly. You do not owe the world perfection. You owe yourself clarity, a calm conscience, a life driven not by applause, but by purpose." So what if you fail? So what if someone else shines brighter today? The truth is, success that comes from fear will never nourish you. It will only consume you, slowly and silently. But success that flows from inner discipline, that's sustainable, that's real, that's stoic. Let go of the lie that you must constantly outperform your last result. Let go of the myth that every step must be flawless. You are not a machine of logic. You are a being of will, of character, of presence. You do not need to prove you're intelligent. You need only live with integrity, and intelligence will reveal itself without effort. And if others villainize you, envy you, reduce you, so be it. That's not your battle. Your battle is with yourself, to rise each day and ask, am I living by my principles or by my fear? To pause and remind yourself, you don't serve titles, you don't serve ego, you serve truth. So if you've carried this weight for too long, consider this your invitation to set it down. Not to stop growing, but to start growing free. Free from the image, free from the expectation, free to be more than a result. Because in the end, the Stoic path is not about becoming more impressive. It's about becoming more whole. And sometimes, the most powerful thing an intelligent person can do is to stop proving and start simply being. The truth is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being the one who sees deeper, thinks longer, or moves slower through the noise. You were not made to blend in. You were made to stand firm in what you know, even when the world misunderstands it. Others don't define your value. Your discipline, your clarity, your truth, that's what shapes who you are. So if something in this message felt real to you, if you've ever carried the silent weight of awareness, consider subscribing to stay in the company of those who understand. And in the comments, drop a quiet scene if any part of this spoke to your inner world. You're not alone in this path. You're just ahead of the noise. Stay grounded, stay sharp, and keep walking with honor. The next video will go even deeper. You won't want to miss it.